How long will the Bitcoin bull market last? In today's video, we're going to be focusing on the historical price tendencies that we tend to see in Bitcoin's price history across cycles to better understand what we can expect in this current parabolic phase of the cycle. So subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward, and let's dive right into it. So the halving in of itself as a reference point for price tends to act as a bit of a mirror. 517 days before the halving, we saw a bear market bottom occur in Bitcoin's price action. And if you actually take this same amount of time and just copy paste it after the halving, you'll notice that that also, of course, resembles 518 days. And really, if we go back to as far as 2016, it took 547 days before the halving for Bitcoin to bear market bottom here. And then it took price roughly the same amount of time for Bitcoin to top out in its bull cycle. That was 518 days after the cycle. And if we just do this also in the 2020 cycle, you'll notice that 17 days before the halving is where Bitcoin peaked in its, or at least bottomed in its bear market, and then 550 days after the halving is where we saw that final bull market peak. So you can see that this halving is a mirror, almost picture perfect, always 30 days rounding error or so. But that just gives us a lot of insight into the fact that if we're going to do the same thing here in this cycle, then we'll see a post-halving move 518 days after the halving is where we finally see that bull market peak. And so the 2020 cycle is quite similar to this 2024 cycle. And here's why. Because in 2020, it took, before the halving, 517 days for Bitcoin to bottom in its bear market. And then it took 549 days after the halving for Bitcoin to peak in its bull market. And just notice how whenever there's a 547 period, there's a 518 period. So you can see 517 here, and then we see that peak in 540, 550 days after the halving. So 2020 is similar to 2024 because 517 days before the halving is where Bitcoin bear market bottomed, and that was the same amount of time in 2024. And as a result, if this continues, then just like in the 2020 cycle, it may take Bitcoin actually 550 days to top out in its cycle. So we have those two options, 518 or 550. And of course, that gets us to September 2025 or October 2025. But that's really compelling, isn't it? And we notice that when we break beyond old all-time highs, that's when the parabolic phase of the cycle begins. And you can see that this, of course, took a few weeks before we finally broke into that parabolic phase of the cycle. Here, for example, in this cycle, we just broke into the parabolic phase of the cycle. That first wave of price discovery didn't have to consolidate too much, and then we saw the parabolic phase of the cycle peak finally. And then we've just seen this parabolic phase of the cycle just begin right now. This is really one of the first week or two in the parabolic phase of the cycle for Bitcoin breaking beyond old all-time highs. So this phase has only just begun, and this orange circle represents the fact that we're only in this moment in the cycle. We're essentially at the very beginning of that parabolic phase in the cycle. We've only just begun it. And in fact, if we try to just better understand these parabolic phases, then of course in the 2017 cycle we saw this sort of fantastic run-up, but we did see diminishing returns in the run-up afterwards in the next cycle. And in fact, it was slightly longer, wasn't it, in terms of time for the bull market peak to occur. So if we were to do the same thing here, of course we have to really accommodate for the fact that there's going to be a diminishing return. And it's difficult to assess how much of a diminishing return that's going to be. If we want to be really cutthroat about it and essentially cut it in half, this is essentially what that parabolic phase of the cycle could look like. That still gets us above 100K into 120, 130K or so. And if we say to ourselves that this parabolic phase in the cycle is going to be similar amount of time, then we do have quite a bit of time left to enjoy, and that's going to be a time period of some 300 days in the parabolic phase of the cycle. Because remember, we saw consolidation for 200 days, and it tends to be the case that this overall post-halving period, where Bitcoin tends to enjoy its exponential rally to new all-time highs and price discovery, this overall period lasts 518, 550 days. So if this reaccumulation phase lasted 200 days, then we have 300 days or so with a bit of cushion there to enjoy this parabolic phase in the cycle. And if we account for diminishing returns, then this really is that sort of, these are really realistic parameters on how to operate when it comes to understanding Bitcoin's parabolic phase in the market cycle. So we're going to see multiple weeks of upside for multiple weeks before we see the first sort of correction here. And you'll notice that even in 2017 as well, we see a correction in this parabolic phase of the cycle, but those corrections simply enable further price appreciation towards the upside. So this is a chart that just showcases to us all the different phases in the Bitcoin halving cycle. And just like we've seen in 2016, we'd see that pre-halving rally, we'd see the pre-halving retrace, the reaccumulation phase, and then that final parabolic phase in the cycle. 2020 as well, pre-halving rally into a pre-halving retrace, and then consolidation into reaccumulation, and then the parabolic phase in the cycle. And for those who have been following the channel, we've really been doing very well in terms of assessing the pre-halving top and pre-halving rally here, the pre-halving retrace, which went a little bit deeper than expected based on historical tendencies. But we did see that reaccumulation phase play out as well. It was a longer reaccumulation phase by standards of history, but here we are in the parabolic phase of the cycle, once again, only just beginning it. And here we can see that the bull market top, based on what we've seen in the past, is mid-September to mid-October 2025, because simply put, it takes Bitcoin 518 days after the halving to bull market peak. That was the case in 2017, and in 2020 it was a little bit longer, 550 days after the halving. So if we're going to essentially just do this, then it gives us a bit of a cushion of 30 days or so that we might see mid-September to mid-October 2025 in terms of a bull market peak. And so we are in the final phase of the Bitcoin cycle, the post-halving parabolic upside phase, and it is quite an extensive phase. You can see that this tends to last quite a bit of time, and 300 days or so is something we can roughly expect, and it's the final phase in the cycle. But in the next few videos, and in fact in one of my previous videos, I spoke about how this parabolic phase in the cycle also has some of its phases. It has that first parabolic price discovery wave, then it has that first price discovery correction. If you'd like to check that video out, feel free to check it out, of course. But we'll be talking about those price discovery waves and corrections in a lot of detail, just so we understand what lays ahead over this next 300-day period or so that we can navigate the market successfully together, make the most of this once every 4 years, essentially, is when we see this parabolic phase in a cycle. So it's really an opportunity to make the most of. So check out the link in the description down below to sign up to the Direct Capital newsletter for level-headed insights, cutting-edge analysis that will help you make the most of this cycle. That's about it for the video. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more videos like this in the future. I'm Direct Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.